Fabulous. I am Holly Gloha. I've been cosplaying for about 7 years, maybe a little bit more. I have 3 major ways of being contacted. The first one is gloha.h on Facebook. That's my personal profile. I will complain about work, love Tom Hiddleston, all my fabulosity is found there. My Holly Gloha cosplay is oriented towards my progress photos for costumes that I'm currently working on. I also have folders for each of the costumes I've made, and in the comments gallery I will put links to what patterns I've used so you can see what it looks like and actually go and purchase said patterns. I'll also put links to the tutorials that I've used and any tips and techniques that I have. I'll also put that in the comments. Now my deviantart.com is a little more descriptive of the costumes that I've made. I'll have why I chose the character. I'll have a very detailed descriptor of how I made the costume, and then again I will list any patterns that I've used, any tutorials that I've referenced, and they will all have links to the actual site. So if you say, I would love to do a Gone with the Wind ball gown, there will be a link that'll take you to the website where I purchased the pattern. Or if you want to learn how to make boot covers, there's a link with a step-by-step tutorial that you can reference the same as I've done. And the last paragraph in my deviantart.com is, in the costumes, is where I talk about problems that I've run into or things that I found that have worked that you may want to keep in mind as you make the costume. You may say, you know what, I was going to try this, but then I read it and she said this works a little bit better. This is something I'm going to keep in mind. So that being done, the sewing machine. You definitely need one of these if you're going to sew. And the little brother machine up there is what I make all of my costumes on. And so far, even though it's a lower end machine, it has worked fabulously for all of my projects. I sewed velvet fabrics, stretch fabrics, bridal fabrics. It is a very good versatile machine. And you've got your breakdown of your machine. You got your power switch, which is usually located on the right-hand side of the machine. Turns it on. You've got the presser foot at the bottom. You step on that and you feed the fabric through. There's also different parts to the machine. We've got a breakdown right here. Familiarize yourself with the parts of your machine, because when you sew and you reference tutorials, they're going to mention things like check the feed dogs, check the thread tensions. Know the vocabulary so that you're not thrown into the deep end of the sewing world and you're wondering, what are they talking about when they say the bobbin or the thread tension?
There should be in your, when you purchase your own sewing machine, there should be a diagram in the owner's manual listed just like this, explaining every part of it and how to thread your machine. If you buy your machine maybe secondhand or from a school, a sewing school that maybe is upgrading their machines, I've gotten a machine that way, that you may not come with a manual, but most manuals nowadays can be found online in PDF format for free. You can order them from the company, but you know, if you can get it for free online, definitely do so. If you're planning on working with thicker materials like denim or leather, you probably want a little higher end machine than just the, you know, the brother,
the standard $100
home,
machine,
the standard home sewing machine. If at all possible, an all-metal machine is highly recommended. They're an actual dressmaker's machine. I have a all-metal Singer 301A that was made in 1961 up in North Texas, and she still runs like a dream. I've made all my costumes on her for a long time before I got my other 2 machines. But you definitely need something stronger than the average home sewing machine for thicker materials. Velvet, Polly says she's had good luck with velvet on this, but
you will go slow on the standard machines. And as a cosplayer, this is unsolicited, I promise, I do have to give a little bit of a shout out to the Brother Corporation. For the World Cosplay Summit, the American team placed 2nd place, and they also won the Brother Award. And for any Texas cosplayers, Anime Matsuri is giving away an embroidery machine that was donated to them by Brother. So Brother tends to recognize cosplay sewing as an art form and not a stigma or anything like that. So I gotta give Brother love.
And they also make slightly higher end machines. They're not industrial machines or dressmaker machines by any means. They're still home sewing machines, but they do make stronger, sturdier, I guess is the word.
Yeah, they have the budget machines, and then they have the progressively more advanced machines, and they even have embroidery machines and maybe a serger. I'm not too certain.
Not sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm in love with the Brother brand. Mine has taken care of me for like 8 years. Eventually, I'll buy a higher end Brother, but you know, Big Blue's taking care of me. I love my blue machine. And speaking of your machine, you want to take care of this. If you take care of your machine will take care of you. Me personally, I do a lot of sewing, so I try to have my machine serviced once a year. I do that for my serger and I do that for my sewing machine. The more you use it, the more you have to have it taken care of. And although you can do it at home, I'm not comfortable with my talents in that area. I will have a professional service do it. Now these are places I found on a Google search. Some of them are national brands and some of them are local Austin based. Do a Google search if you're not Austin based. And personally, I say give love to the little guys. The big guys, you know, they're well off. They're going to be taken care of. But in Austin, we have our Hancock Fabrics, So Much More, the Stitch Lad, City Service Sewing Machines, Textiles, A Quilter's Folly, and then again, a Google search. And that's good because you can reference Yelp and even just a generic search for reviews. Somebody can say, I turned my machine in, I paid $70. It crashed immediately afterward and I found out they didn't do anything. Or somebody may say, I've been going here for years, they take care of your machine, this is a good place to go. Google is a fabulous friend of yours in any capacity, but especially in the cosplay world, from tutorials, reviews, references. Do your research.
City Service Sewing Machines, that's Maurice over on East 6th? Is that where it is? I don't know.
Google
I can't remember. But that's Maurice. That is where all the fashion industry professionals take their machine, the local fashion industry professionals. Textiles is actually a fabric store, and we'll talk a little bit more about fabric stores in a minute. But Textiles is actually a fabric store, but the guy who owns it has been in the industry for 30 years, and he can service machines. It just depends on whether he's busy or not. But he often has. He's not as expensive as Maurice is over at City Service.
And don't even be afraid to ask them if you go somewhere, where do you have your machine serviced? Do you recommend them? People are not going to be stingy with information, especially in a community like ours where you do a lot of sewing. So the sewing box, this will be, once you've got your sewing machine, this is the next thing you're going to have to start building. There are a lot of things that people will eventually put into their sewing boxes, but these are just the bare bone basics, subject to change. Don't let this be your, the mantra, just whatever you find you would need. And we'll start off with, obviously, scissors. Personally, I recommend spring-loaded because as you open and close your hand, as you cut the scissors, your hands will eventually get tired and cramp. If it's spring-loaded, you just squeeze it and then it pops right back open. And the pinking scissors is good if you have fabrics that tend to fray a little bit easier. You can just trim those ends just a little bit so you're not wasting fabric, you're not sewing, and it's not threading up all over the place. Again, you're going to need pins. That's pretty much a basic. And then a cosplayer, sewing person's favorite tool in the world is the seam ripper.
Our savior.
Yes, oh my gosh. It doesn't matter if you're a first-time stitcher or if you've been sewing for years, I guarantee they will have the seam ripper right next to them. It's happened to me, it'll happen to you. Get a seam ripper. You will love it.
You'll sew a sleeve on upside down, inside out. You'll sew, you think you're being clever and sewing two pieces together, and then you realize you've sewn two back pieces of pant legs together and two of the front legs together, so you have one that's much larger. As you're feeding it through, some fabric will find its way underneath there.
Or
it'll fold as you're underneath as you're sewing, and you won't even notice it until you're done, and you're like, oh, I'm thin, oh, I'm not, crap.
Oh yes, we need to put like the Love of the Seam Ripper Facebook, and I guarantee there will be so many likes on that page, and the seam ripper saved my outfit. The hem measuring tool is this right here at the little bottom here. And it's amazing for detailing what kind of measurements on your hem you're going to do, but it also helps you when you're sewing. You can put the needle down on your machine and find out what the exact measurements on the grooves are as you feed your fabric through. So if they say you have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, a 1/4 inch seam allowance, this will help you determine which notch on your machine is which measurement. So it's very versatile as well, plus impromptu ruler if you need it.
It also, speaking of the grooves on your sewing machine, if yours aren't labeled, some of the older machines, like my older all-metal machine actually has the measurements labeled of each groove, what the seam allowance is on each of those lines. But my newer machines don't. A trick to, if you're just gonna work from patterns, the seam allowance is pretty much universally 5/8 of an inch. And it helps to take a piece of Scotch tape and mark the 5/8 mark on your machine, so you never have to think about it. You can just look down and see, oh, where the tape begins, that's where the edge of my fabric should be.
There'll be times when you're sewing and you won't realize that the fabric will have shifted to the next groove, so all of a sudden your outfit's a little bit tighter or a little bit looser depending on which way the fabric shifts. And then lastly, or not lastly, but on this slide, the thimble. There will be times when you have to do a little bit of hand stitching, and the thimble will save your fingers. And lately, in some of my costumes, I've been doing hand stitching. I truly appreciate the thimble now. I don't have the grooves in my fingers. I don't have the pin pricks. For a while there, it seemed like my signature on my costumes was at some point I would pick myself and bleed on it and cry. And then Facebook it and then cry.
Blood, sweat, and tears.
Literally.
Literally. And that will happen in most of your costumes.
And that could be your signature too. It's got my tears and my blood on it.
Yeah, but the thimble's really helpful, especially if you're working on white fabrics and you can prick, and then red. There's a red dot. Oh, I meant to do that. And then you have to like dot the whole outfit.
Yes. I'm a very scary ladybug. So expanding on the sewing box, machine needles, and they have different calibers of needles. They have the universal needles that are used on most fabrics, but then they have specialty needles if you're doing something like stretch vinyls or spandexes where it's a little bit of a blunted end. And then you'll have the thicker caliber needles for the higher end fabrics and the denims especially. And when you purchase your needles up there, usually they will have the measurements, but they'll also tell you what they are specifically used for. As you sew, your needle will dull, so you've got to change these needles out.
And you may think, oh, I could just use a universal needle, and for the most part that is true, but certain materials really do need their specific needles, like leather. You can use a leather.
Vinyls.
You can use a leather needle for denim too, or just heavy brocades or damasks as well. But like for what is it? The one that's completely no point at all. What's that one?
Oh, the blunted needle for vinyl, or
Not for vinyl.
oh,
It's so it doesn't get caught.
oh dear.
What is that? I just had it and I lost it.
No. Well, I'll segue for a second there. But like they have a specialty needles for spandex and vinyls especially, and I mentioned that because season 4 should have the power ponies. Love to see what their comic book costumes will look like. And with vinyls, and especially vinyls, you'll need a specialty needle because a universal needle will prick the fabric in a way that if you put it on, this vinyl will run. Just like pantyhose, and there goes all that money you spent on these specialty fabrics and all that labor that you put into it. And you don't want to be the power pony with the runner, you want to be the fabulous power pony. Fabric pens and pencils are a good investment, as well as sewing chalk, so you can mark annotations if you're doing something like pleating, or if you want to do something special with the hem. For the pens, you really want to test it out on your fabric first. There's 2 different types of pens. There's the pens that you can mark on the fabric and then water will make it go away. And there's pens that you can mark and after about a few minutes the ink itself starts to fade. However, they come in colors like pink and blue, and you really want to see how this will transition on a white fabric, or even mark it and then sew it and see what happens, because sometimes the ink will fade but the thread will keep the color.
You can also just buy, go to the dollar store or the grocery store and buy colored pencils. Those work just as well. We use that all the time in school. That's what they use all in the industry. Hancock, Joanne doesn't carry this, I don't think, because I haven't seen it there, but Hancock has this great tool that's a pin, and it comes with different, it's like a mechanical pencil but with chalk, and it comes with different colors of chalk. So if you're working with white fabric, obviously a white chalk isn't going to help you, but if you're working on, say, green fabric, then you need to use like the red or something contrasting, and it has the entire rainbow pretty much in it, and it's pretty cheap. It's less than $10. I highly recommend it. The colored pencils are great if you know you're working, especially if you're marking on the inside, the wrong side of your fabric. If you're going to be marking anything on the outside of your fabric, I definitely recommend chalk and nothing else. Chalk will come off. You can dab it off with water, but there's always a chance that these pencils or the pens may not come off. And if they're on the outside of your shell fabric, then it's just gonna be a permanent mark, and you don't want that.
I've had it happen where I'll wash off the fabric, but for some reason the thread retains it. And tears and crying and Facebook updates that people are like, oh, like.
Oh, you again.
So I would also recommend a hand sewing kit in your sewing box. There are times when you will have to do a little more complex things by hand. The sewing machine, no matter how fabulous, has its limits, just like hand sewing has its limits. So that's a good investment. I would also recommend a bobbin box, which you can see a picture down here. As you sew and you do more and more projects, instead of having to change out the thread on your bobbin, get yourself a box. Some of them come with the thread already loaded on there, so if you're doing rarity, white. If you're doing Applejack, switch it out, put the yellow on. You don't have to strip off all the white and then reload it up with the yellow. And then of course, thread. There are different tensions of threads. There's the polyester threads, there's the cotton threads, there's the embroidery threads. Usually I think the polyester ones are usually the stronger ones. They're more universally used in sewing. And things like the embroidery threads are very pretty to look at, but they can't hold seams together. They're more for decorations. It's also like the metallic tinseling thread. And as you sew, you will learn what works and what doesn't. But usually if it's universal, usually 9 times out of 10 you can use it for whatever it is you're creating. So let's talk some patterns. So when you're starting out and you go to your Joann fabrics and your Hancock fabrics, these are usually the big 4 that you know about. You've got your Simplicity, your Butterick, your McCall's, and your Vogue. Simplicity is very simple. They're clean lines, very easy fabrics to work with. In fact, if you're starting out, they're one of the ones that I do recommend because the instructions are very simple, the details are very simple. When you pull out the pattern, there's no box pleating and knife pleating and princess seamings and miter at the corner or anything. They try to do this so that you can create amazing outfits that are simple and easy to create, but they still look good. I have a lot of Simplicity patterns. I do reference my Simplicity patterns quite a bit. Butterick's has a little bit more detailing in it, and I've noticed in their customing section they tend to favor more historical patterns. So if you want to have something very fun, very elegant, I would probably say check out the Butterick ones. McCall's is kind of a toss-up between Butterick and Simplicity. They have very easy costumes, and they have the more advanced costumes, so you can kind of pick and choose, and they will annotate if it's easy or not. You know, level it to your sewing abilities. And then lastly is Vogue. Vogue is the haute couture patterning. These are designers that are sharing their patterns for the dresses they're making with you. Vogue tends to run a little bit smaller, and they're very complex, very detailed instructions that make gorgeous gowns, but you're talking princess seams, knife pleating, everything's mitered, but you're getting a very high-end looking garment when you're done.
And they have a lot of historically accurate fashion, like from period pieces, like the 50s. They have a huge 50s collection with the
vintage
new look,
Vogue.
vintage Vogue. The 2 patterns that are going around, one is the Butterick, which is the jacket, which is an pretty easy pattern. The other one is the tuxedo pattern, that's by Vogue, that's going around. The hardest thing to make, period, is a bespoke men's tailored suit. Bespoke means like you draft the pattern from scratch specifically to a specific person. Now, of course, when you have a pattern, that doesn't happen, but still, a men's suit, the men's tailored suit is the hardest thing to make. It's harder than any gown, any women's suit. It's just the hardest thing to make. I'm going to tell you a story just to illustrate how hard it is. When I was in school, in my second construction class, one of our things that we had to make was a sports coat, and it had to be, you know, fully lined and fully tailored and constructed. We got to the faux placket on the jacket sleeve, and I had 3 professors poring over the instructions saying, they want you to do what? These are people who have worked in the industry for years and have taught in the school for years, and they didn't understand. And I was like, what do I do? Well, I don't know, let me call this one. Well, I don't know, let me call this one. Well, I think that, no, well, I guess this. So, and not all Vogues are like that, but the harder ones are really hard.
There's a reason why you can tell the difference between, I guess, what we call contemporary fashions and couture fashions. There's a price difference because contemporary fashions, very fashionable, very financially accessible, very easy to make. Once you start to sew and you start looking at your Chanels and your Diors, you can start to see why these are a little bit more expensive, besides the fact that they're also hand done too. So when you put them on, they fit a lot better, higher grade fabrics, and a lot more handwork on it. But I'm segueing anyway. So back to the patterns. I also recommend a little bit of love to the little guys. Berta, Quick Sew, and the Green Pepper are some of the three that I use. The Berta pattern right up here is a very simple corset pattern. I've used that for quite a few cosplays, and I like that they can give you the scallop, or excuse me, the sweetheart neckline, they give you the straight across neckline, and they can give you the waist cincher. So you can kind of modify the pattern and get whatever look it is you want. Quick Sew I put down here because they've got a basic bodysuit pattern if you ever want to do any form of like a superhero cosplay. That's got very simple seams, very simple lines, and very easy instructions. And then the Green Pepper right here, I mentioned this one because a lot of cosplayers reference that pattern right there specifically if they want to do any form of Sailor Moon cosplays or any form of Fuku looking costuming. There's tutorials online that'll tell you buy this pattern and they'll show you how to modify it. And then you've got the independents, and I'm really falling in love with these guys. So Harriet's.com tends to specialize in historically accurate gowns. I made my Madame Red ball gown using hers. They're $40 a pattern, but they are very beautiful, very accurate, and not something you will find in Butterick or McCall's because this is something that's very, very detailed.
Oh, speaking of price real quick about patterns.
Oh, yes.
Never pay full price for patterns. If on the big four, never pay full price for that because those go on sale for $1 a piece at least once a month.
$4 for Vogue, I believe.
Yeah, Vogue never goes under $4 or $5 per pattern, but that's a steal because they don't actually mark that down as much as the other ones. They say that they're never charged full price. It's always 40% off the MSRP or whatever, but if they can still sell it for $1 a piece and still make a profit, like you're getting really screwed if you're paying $16 a pattern
yes.
from those big
four.
Yes.
And they'll do the thing where they sell it for $1 a pattern and your limit is 10, but you can get 10 amazing patterns for $10.
And that doesn't mean you can't leave the store and go back in.
Or just drive to the other Joann's if they're being mean to you.
Yeah.
So I mentioned the PG of Williamsburg pattern here because when I first watched My Little Pony and I heard Rarity speak, my first thought was, that's Scarlett O'Hara with the soul. They specialize. If you've seen Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara is a very mean person and she's worse in the book. Rarity, I love you, you've got a soul. But PG Williamsburg does a lot of Gone with the Wind patterning. They're also very historically accurate because they were allowed to go into the museums, look at the costumes from Gone with the Wind, and create patterns directly from it. It's very detailed. From the bust down, the dress is easy to make. The flounce took probably about 2-3 weeks of hand sewing. So when you do these historically accurate costumes, be willing to invest some time. Don't Heroes of Cosplay it where it's like, I've got 3 days to make this costume, I'm gonna do it. No, take your time.
I really want you, I forgot about, that's how you dressed it, how you came up with this. I really want you to do a parody of the Carol Burnett skit.
Oh, yes, the
where she comes
clothes
out and do it as Rarity.
Yes, they actually have.
Y'all know what I'm talking about?
It's in Gone with the Wind when she rips down the curtains and she makes this gorgeous green gown and she's trying to convince Rhett to just give her money because she's fabulous and he's got money and he should give her the money anyway.
He's trying to still portray that image. Well, on the Carol Burnett show, they did a famous skit where they're parodying Gone with the Wind, and it's the entire 4 hours in like 7 minutes or something. Well, Carol Burnett as Scarlett O'Hara walks out on the balcony and she has a curtain dress, but it's literally just curtains, and the curtain rod still on her shoulders.
Still on there.
And it's hysterical. Look it up on YouTube if you haven't seen it. It's one of the most famous moments in classic television, and I really want to see Rarity doing that now.
That'd be awesome. But I have no qualms whatsoever if somebody else wants to do the Rarity barbecue dress, because Rarity's nicer than Scarlett O'Hara. But they also have different Gone with the Wind costumes there if you want to do Rhett Butler Rarity or Rhett Butler any version pony. I've noticed a trend with steampunk really taking a front seat in the costuming world, and I want to mention Ageless Patterns because they tend to specialize in very elegant Victorian, Edwardian style costuming that would probably put your steampunk cosplay a little further ahead than I just bought a corset and put on a bustle skirt. Then you could be like, I made this corset and this bustle skirt. And also you will have cosplayers that are willing to share their patterns, their tips, and their techniques. And I want to call out Jessie Pridemore, Rufflebutt Cosplay. That's her Etsy shop down there. I bought a bunny suit pattern from her, and the thing is absolutely, utterly amazing. She's mentioned tips and techniques in there that I have not thought of. And as I'm drafting this, I'm like, okay, I can see why her outfits look amazing. And this is the bodysuit pattern in the bottom corner that eventually I'm going to buy, because this one is specially designed so there's only one seam. There's no side seams, just one seam, so it's nice and clean. And plus the model looks fabulous. Stuff like that from a cosplayer makes me want to support them. I like to support my cosplay community.
And she's really nice too.
She's not a snob, so I love when they're like that. So we still got those patterns out there going around. We're going to talk the basics on how to read a pattern in...
We have the tuxedo one. Someone has the tuxedo one.
Uh-oh. Alrighty, that's okay. We're just going to talk the basics on how to read a pattern so you can get the pattern that's designed for your shape and size. And first off, we've got the price in the upper right-hand corner. Totally ignore that $16.95. You want the dollar deal. The level of difficulty is a good little thing to reference. You want to get something that's beginner, average. If you've been sewing a while, then go for the more difficult one, or as Vogue likes to call it, difficile. Ah, yes. The line drawings right here will show you what you will be making. It'll show you where the seams are, because there's times when you're making, for example, we'll use this coat, and you're saying, well, I don't want the seam going down the entire back, or I want it to flare out a little bit. You can see what it looks like before you purchase it. You've got the text description, and that'll tell you not only what are you making, but it also mentions the kind of fabrics that you're going to need, the kind of notions you're going to need, if you're going to need bias tape, if you're going to need zippers. Make sure you sit down and read everything on that pattern to see if this is something within your ability to sew, within your price range, and if that's something you want to invest in, or if you want to look for something a little more simple or a little more difficult. And the fabric recommendations are just recommendations, with the exception of when they say it's a stretch fabric, then at the top they'll have an annotation that says, hold your fabric, if it doesn't stretch to here, this is not the fabric pattern for you. And then the date and season just kind of lets you know when this pattern came out, because a lot of patterns will reference fashion couture at that time frame. And then after you've got your measurements, the yardage right there will tell you what size you're looking for, and they'll tell you how many yards you should purchase if your fabric is 45 inches, or if your fabric is 60 inches if you're making a jacket or a top or the pants.
And when you're looking at fabric widths, you go into the fabric store, and at the end of on the bulk of the fabric, at the end, there'll be the price, and it'll be the fiber content. but it'll say, like this one says it's 43 inches. That counts as 45 inches. All commercial fabric that you can get at Joann and Hancock, with the exception of like some quilting back material, which can be like 108 inches wide. Almost all your fabric that you can buy by the yard at national chains are going to be basically either 45 or 60. It may say 61, it may say 58, it may say 43, it may say 56, but just round it to one or the other. It's the same. When they have the cutting layouts inside the pattern to show you where to lay out the pieces in order to use that much, they take into account that it's going to be within a few inches, and they're not, it has to be this much, and if it's a little shorter, you're not going to be able to fit it. And it's always going to give you an extra, a couple of inches buffer room. So don't worry about not having enough, although extra is always better than not enough.
And this is just a little bit more of a detailed patterning envelope. And again, they'll have the same things. They'll have like the fabrics you should use, your body measurements, what kind of sizes you're looking for. I'm trying to see both sides. Stick with the suggested fabrics as you get a little more familiar with the stretch and the weft and the warp of a fabric. You can kind of see what you can substitute for each other.
Take your time when you're at the fabric store. Walk around all the sections, put your hand on it, feel the hand, feel the drape, bounce it a bit, see how it moves, how it hangs, and that'll give you, eventually, you do that enough, you'll learn, okay, a cotton does this, okay, a polyester plain weave does this, a satin weave does this, a heavier satin does this, a taffeta does this, a brocade.
And don't be afraid to take pictures and see how it looks on a camera. A lot of people, when they start out sewing, go for the budget costume satin. And to the human eye, it looks very pretty, it looks very fantasy. To a camera, it looks like you're wearing a garbage bag. And there's a reason why when people have been cosplaying a while and they see the costume satin, they're just like, oh, it's because they understand this is a lower budget fabric. Also, as you've been costuming a while and sewing, you get used to working with brocades and higher end fabrics and a little bit richer. And then you go back and revisit the costume satin and know it for the budget fabric that it is. So I honestly, when I started out, I've got yards and yards of trash bag satin. I tend to use that as muslin. When I was testing out Jessie Pridemore's bunny suit, I pulled out my trash bag satin, I cut it up, I made the bunny suit, it looked good. I felt bad because it was trash bag satin, but now that I'm making out of the good fabric for my next Celestia, I know the pattern works and I don't feel bad for wasting the trash bag satin because it was a noble sacrifice for my good fabric.
It can also work well as cheaper lining. It can be cheaper than the actual lining fabrics. And I kind of like it better than the actual lining fabrics. I like to use a satin. I think it's smoother and lets stuff slip on, especially tighter fitting or tighter sleeves, for instance.
And there's usually, like, a lot of lining fabrics sometimes are very sheer.
Yeah.
And then the costume satins are a little bit thicker. So when you take it off, you don't see the seams. You don't see through it. And you're like, well,
Yeah,
it's a black jacket with a pink lining and it would pop more, but it's kind of meh.
And if you're looking for, when you're at the fabric store, it's going to have, fluorescent lighting. The colors are going to be distorted. If at all possible, most chains of fabric stores have windows at the front. That's, if at all possible, if you're really concerned about the color, bring it up to the natural light, just
but
to
not
the
outside.
window. No, not outside. But bring it up to the light and let it see, because you will notice a difference in the color and even the texture sometimes in the natural light, because the natural light is going to show you what's actually there rather than what's going to be under the nasty artificial light. Now, you should definitely take into account what it looks like under the artificial light, because that's probably what you're going to be under at conventions when you're inside. But to get the true color, always look at it under natural light. They also have the little OT lights, they call them. They're specifically made to imitate natural light. Sometimes they have a magnifying glass on them. Sometimes they have that at the cutting counter, and you can ask them if to use that instead of going to the windows if they don't have windows.
I'm sorry, getting sucked into the conversation. So once you purchased your pattern, you said, this is the pattern for me, I've got the fabric, I've got the notions. When you open it up, you're going to notice two parts to your pattern. you're going to have the thicker paper pattern, and it'll show you the different variations of whatever it is you're making. They're going to show you the individual pieces and what each piece is, and then down here they're going to talk about how you put it together. They will talk about, I'm trying to see, like right around here, they'll show you how to fold your fabric. Normally they have one where they show you how to lay out the pieces so you get as much, you use up as much, or not as much, as little fabric as possible, and you get as much out of it as possible. And they will talk about lay it this way, position it this way. They'll talk about what some of the annotations mean, like the notches that you want to clip out so the patterns match up to each other. The dots where you want to pin them so as you sew, they hit these markers and stay together. They don't shift or fit funky. I'm trying to see what they have up there as well. And this paper is going to be a little bit thicker. A little bit thinner is the darker yellow patterning paper right there. It's a little bit more sheer. When you open it up, you can, and I'd probably say practice on the not patterning paper of it, you can iron it very low level heat. You don't want to burn through this pattern that you paid $1 for. But if you iron it out, then as you put it on your fabric and you start to cut it out, it doesn't crinkle on you, it doesn't have that weird fold or anything on it, and it's made of a sheer fabric. And what you can also do is transfer that pattern onto another sheet of paper so that you have this as your master pattern, and then you have thicker paper to cut your pattern out from.
It is really important actually to iron the pattern pieces if at all possible, because that's gonna, even the minute folds and creases in the tissue paper will affect your pattern, how it fits together, how it hangs. So to get the best fit and the way it was designed to hang, you want to make sure that everything is as flat as possible when you're cutting.
And lay the pattern pieces out the way they recommend it. Don't do this thing where you're like, well, if I tilt it a little bit like this, then I can put this piece up here, because then your fabric will hang differently. It'll cling to your body differently. For example, in a sleeve, if you tilt the sleeve, all of a sudden the sleeve will start to rotate on your arm. So instead of having a beautiful seam from the axillary area to the wrist, it'll come up and around to the outside of the wrist. There we go. And we talk a lot about fabric, and we're just going to give you some basic terminology about fabrics. You've got your selvage. When you look at your fabric, there we go. You've got your fold on one side and you've got your selvage at the other, and that's just the very end of the fabric right there. You have your warp, which is going to be the horizontal, and then you've got your weft, which is the vertical.
We got that back.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, wait a minute, there you go.
Well, and you can remember that by thinking the weft goes left to right, left.
Weft is left to right.
And then the warp goes vertically.
And that's just something as they lay the pattern out, they'll say, well, here's your selvage, here's your fold, watch your warp, watch your weft. These are just the terminology so you kind of understand what you're doing with your fabric. Recommended fabric reading, and I'm pretty sure there's sewing applications, and like I said, Google is your friend, but there's times when you're sewing, you don't want to put it down and pick up the phone or rush to the computer. Personally, I recommend a book like this one by Sandra Betzina, and it's fabric savvy, and what I like is alphabetically she lists some of the most commonly used fabrics like satin, silk de pony, moire, suede, and in this book she will talk about how to lay it out, what kind of fabric, or excuse me, what kind of pens or chalks you want to use when marking it, what kind of scissors to use for cutting, if you need interfacing, what kind of thread. She'll show you what kind of needle you need to sew this type of fabric. She'll recommend what kind of presser foot you need, how to finish it, if you need top stitches, what kind of closures and hems, and just a little bit of informative facts about the fabric. And I also like this book because in the back, she'll talk about, let me see if I can't find it, different types of seams. So if something says, this can take a French seam, you can see what it looks like, and it'll even give you instructions a little bit, or you can do like a YouTube tutorial or any other tutorials that you find. Besides seam, she'll talk about certain type of detailings like the stitches that you'll need, the different types of closures, buttons and zippers and eyelets and lacings, hems. It's a good investment book, but before you just rush off and buy it, I do recommend go to a bookstore, flip through it, see if this is something you would like to have in your library. Personally, I reference it a lot, especially if I'm working with a fabric that's kind of new to me. I want to make sure I've got the right thread, I've got the right needle. I'm going to pass this one around. But please make sure I get it back, it's not free. Another resourceful book, I don't have this one, but I do have this one. If you have somebody that's taking maybe a fashion merchandising class, or if they're in a textiles class, they usually have access to a book like this. And it has fabric swatches that you can look at and you can feel, and sometimes they'll tell you a little bit about the facts about it. So if you're doing a character like Applejack and you want to do a top, you know right off the bat looking at it, you're not going to do a silver brocade because those are very fancy feeling fabrics. This will give you a chance to see what kind of fabric fits the character, and they'll tell you if it's synthetic or if it's a natural fiber. And it's good to just kind of look at that and get a feel for it and say, this is something I can work with, or this is not what I thought it is, it's kind of disappointing. Let me see if I can't move on to something else. Sorry. That one's coming around too. Please don't pick out any of the fabrics, I need that. All right. So we're going to talk about buying some. Oh, okay.
And this is a book that, this was one of our required books in school. It's the Reader's Digest New Complete Guide to Sewing. It's very similar to these other ones. You know, it'll talk about projects and kind of walk you through the whole thing. It'll talk about different hemming techniques, different seams, darts, different types of fabric. It's very similar to those other ones. I'll pass it around to you so you can get a look at it.
So eventually, now that we filled your brain full of facts, let's go a little bit more. We're going to talk about actually buying your fabrics. Now you know about the big chain stores, your Joann Fabrics, your Hancock Fabrics, even Walmart and Hobby Lobby. Although Walmart and Hobby Lobby tend to have the lower end fabrics, there's a reason why it's there, there's a reason why it's $3. Joann and Hancock's.
Well, I wish it was that cheap at Hobby Lobby.
Oh. I don't go in there.
Well, I mean, you're right. It's mostly lower stuff, but lower quality stuff. Sometimes you'll find something that you can't find at the other stores at Hobby Lobby. I found a satin that was just the right weight and just the right color that I could not find anywhere else. I was like, I don't really want to pay that much, but I guess I'm going to.
And that's why the Hobby Lobby app on the smartphone is fabulous.
Oh yes.
Joann and Hancock's, they kind of run the gamut. They've got the lower end fabrics and they have their amazing fabrics, and the amazing ones tend to go ridiculously fast. I walked into Joann's one day, they had this gorgeous bridal lace, $40 a yard. I went home to see how much I would need for a project I was working on, went back the next day, it was gone. I went to Hancock and found a clergy print brocade that's usually online for at least $12, $13 a yard. And I was even asking the store clerk, you know, do you know if you'll be getting more of this? And she said, I don't even know how we got this one. So they are worth looking into. You have your local stores, you have Textiles, Fabric, or Common Thread. These are Austin-based stores. If you're not in Austin, Google search local fabric stores, and you can kind of give love to the little guys that are out there in your town.
Textiles, as I said earlier, it's run by a man who's been in the fashion industry 30 years. I occasionally work there, so come by and say hi. But the nice thing about Textiles is he custom stocks his store. He goes to LA once a month and drives a truck back and purchases from the fabric district directly there. They offer wish list services. They're going to start a new program that's called, they're going to call From LA in a Day. One of his business partners is moving out there at the end of the month. At least that's when they're planning to. So they'll be able to actually buy the fabric that same day and overnight it to you direct from LA. And they can get stuff you can't get at the bigger chains. And he buys a lot. He supplies a lot to the UT kids, the other colleges here locally with design programs. And so he carries a lot of stretch knits and stretch vinyls, higher end wools. He gets Italian stuff. They have a huge selection of silks right now as well, and their prices, I mean, for the nicer stuff, some of their more expensive fabrics go up to about $40 a yard, but it starts, reasonably at $6, I think.
And a service like that is why you would like the little guys a little bit more. They will tend to do a little bit more for you, because not only are they running a business, but they're hoping that you'll be a repeat customer.
And I just have to warn everyone really quickly, the Hancock down south, the one across from the Hobby Lobby. What is that?
Lamar.
They're almost every single person that works there is the rudest person ever. Do not expect good customer service. Every single one of them, the managers, I mean, they won't even smile at you.
Yeah.
It's really, really disappointing.
Aww.
So just be prepared. However, the Joann's are usually really nice.
And we'll mention that you can buy fabrics online, eBay, Etsy. They're starting to do more fabric online, but I'm also going to mention SY Fabrics, Spoonflower, Stretch House Fabrics. For example, I'll use Stretch House Fabrics. They will send you free samples. Not everybody will send you free samples, but you can go online, look at their fabrics, and say, well, I'm not sure if this is the proper color. You can email them, and most of them will be free, but some will charge you. I especially want to draw attention to Spoonflower, and I think it's called Fabric on Demand. Those are online fabric stores that can do custom printing. And I know a lot of cosplayers are doing Arkham City's Catwoman. And if you look at her costume, it's a bodysuit, but it has this hexagonal design on it that you're not going to find randomly at Joann's or Hancock or anywhere. And they will mention that they will design this, send it in, and these companies will print it onto the fabrics for them. So if you want to do a kimono where it's got these falling cherry blossoms and you don't want to hand paint it, keep in mind places like that, it is a little pricier because you're paying for their services and the fabrics. And I think Fabric on Demand does theirs on stretch fabrics, and Spoonflower only sticks to like the cottons and the fabrics that don't stretch as much.
Spoonflower, I can't speak for Fabric on Demand, and they're probably more pricier because of their specialty fabrics, but I looked into Spoonflower once. I have not used them, so I can't personally vouch for their quality or their speed or their, that stuff, but it seemed very reasonably priced for me for what it was. It was not, I mean, it was definitely more than, off the shelf fabric from a national chain, but it was very reasonably priced for getting exactly what you wanted.
And one I think I want to mention that I need to eventually put on here, I believe they're called Deco Fabrics, and what they are they are heat-backed vinyl. And basically what that is you'll see these characters, and we'll take Clamp, like Cardcaptor Sakura, where she's got the big ball gown with the gold scrolling designs. You can buy a yard of vinyl, cut out what that scrolling looks like, and then just iron it onto the fabric and it adheses. Yes, so if you're going to be doing a superhero cosplay, if you're going to be doing like, I'm going to mention Ms. Marvel, where she's got a gold thunderbolt across the bust, instead of buying gold fabric and having to spray on the adhesion and put it on there and then stitch it over, you can go to a specialty shop like that, cut it out, and just iron it on yourself. So it's one I got to put on there. So eventually, you're going to want to learn how to actually sew. The big chain stores like Joann and Hancock's do offer classes. They have a segmented area where you can sit down and they will teach you the basics. You'll have a teacher doing one-on-one, or there'll be a few other people. And they'll take you from the very basics to accomplishing whatever it is the craft is at the end, if it's like a little smock or if it's like a little pillowcase. Local stores, and these are awesome ones, do classes. You've got Stitching Studio, Stitch Lab, and Austin School of Design. One of those, and I think it's the Stitching Studio, would have this thing where every Monday they would get together and they would sew blankets to donate to hospitals and homeless shelters. First off, absolutely amazing karma. Second off, it'll give you a chance to actually practice with the machine so you get comfortable sewing, that you get comfortable sewing a straight line, because believe it or not, people tend to lose their patience and try to feed that fabric through as fast as possible, and they say sewing a straight line is actually one of the more difficult things in sewing.
It is.
It's not ruching, it's not knife pleating, it's not none of that. It's keep a straight line. And some of them do work shares. You can call these local stores and see if you can't volunteer, and they'll give you free classes or discounted classes. And what you'll do is run the registers, or you might take all this loose fabric and put it back on the bolts for them. The smaller independent people will try to work with you, and sometimes they also have fabrics there. Stitching Studio, when I went, it's under a new proprietor now, went to Japan a lot and would bring back these gorgeous Japanese silks with cherry blossoms and koi designs all over them. And you could do work shares where if you work for a certain amount of time, she would let you either get a discount on her class or have a yard of this gorgeous fabric. So call them and see what they can do for you.
A lot of times at least the bigger stores, the national stores, they'll have a section somewhere, like at the Joann down south, it's right by the restrooms. There's a cork board where people will pin business cards, and maybe that'll be for the local fabric stores, like the ones that we mentioned, or for individual teachers or individual commissioners. And those are great resources to utilize that aren't as quite well known, but you can find maybe private lessons there as well.
Also, a lot of the continuing education classes with community colleges or local high schools.
Oh yeah, distance learning and
the informal classes at universities.
Yes.
There's often a lot of times sewing classes there as well.
Oops, where are you not going? Okay, there we go. So things that are nice to know, like if you need help, the internet is good for tutorials. If you come across some terminology in your patterns that you just don't quite understand, especially if you got something vogue and you don't have access to professors and teachers, you can do a Google search and find out what this word is or how this technique is done. YouTube tutorials, especially because they're recorded, you can see how they're manipulating the fabric to get the look that you want. DeviantArt.com, some people tend to have tutorials in their picture tutorials, like picture 1, this is what I did. Picture 2, this is what I did. I would also recommend, recommended reading stuff like the Sewing Bible, which I have here. And sometimes you'll come across terminology like stay stitching, miter corners and stuff like that. It's always good to have a book like this where you can just grab it, look up the word, look up the technique, and it's right there. I believe you were mentioning the Reader's Digest New Complete Guide to Sewing.
And you can often find at some half-price books locations, they have a fashion section, and that not only includes, historical fashion plates, art books, biographies of famous designers and things like that, but also a lot of these books will wind up there. And sometimes they may be a couple of years older, but honestly, most of these basic techniques have not changed in decades.
And also online, you can reference cosplayers. Cosplay.com has got forums where you can say, I'm working on this costume.
Their forums are godly. Yes. I don't like cosplay.com. I think their system, last time I tried it, this was several years ago, I found it I didn't like the way it was set up, but their forums are an amazing wealth of knowledge. Most cosplayers will share their information because, speaking for myself, I learned from other cosplayers. My way of paying it forward is if somebody comes up to me, I pay it forward by letting them know this is the tutorial I use, this is the fabric I use. And a good example is cosplayer homepage, like our DeviantArt accounts, where we'll list what we did. So if you can't get a hold of us specifically, or you're like, I really don't want to bother them, let me check their page out. Facebook, and I'm going to mention God Save the Queen Fashions. She posts a lot of very interesting tips and tutorials every now and then. She'll post what costume she's working on for a customer and things that she learned at her fashion schools that are, you'll look at this and go, okay, I forgot about that, and that's a good refresher, or I didn't think about that at all, and I'm really glad she put that there. And believe it or not, you can win a competition on sewing alone. And I know in this day and age of Warbler armor and LED light ups, and they've got a fog machine blasting out fog as they've got this sonic boom box on their back, you really can win on sewing alone. I have seen it happen. I promise I'm not just making this up. But to do it, the biggest thing is craftsmanship. And as somebody who judges, these are some of the things that they're going to look for. Take your time when you sew. Don't, like I said, don't Heroes of Cosplay it where you got 3 days and you're going to make an Elizabethan ball gown with rispastos and you're going to have this long train and angel wings and it's going to light up and it's going to do this. No. Ain't gonna happen.
No. Take your time when you sew.
Don't be afraid. I was just gonna say, don't be afraid to push it off until the next convention. We had a duet that we were going to do. Actually, we were supposed to wear it today as Celestia and a male Nightmare Moon. We want them to be competition pieces, and we want them to be, they're very elaborate, very detailed, very larger than life. And so we were like, you know what? We don't want to rush this.
It was
I just finished drafting the pattern for the shirt like a week ago, and I was like, I could do this. I really don't want to do all that beading and hand stitching.
For me, it was, I was working with steel boning for the first time, which I'm falling in love with, but I can see why you have to take your time. Also for the outfit I'm drafting, I'm going to need a birdcage skirt, which is going to require a lot of hands-on manipulation with maybe some fencing wire and then covering that up in fabric. And I could probably throw something together, but it'd look thrown together. I opted to just wait, unveil it at Onicon if I get to go where it's fabulous and they're not like, well, it was nice, but the one she had at Onicon was better. Don't be afraid to push it back. Believe it or not, the world keeps spinning. When you sew, that seam work is very noticeable. If you have problems sewing a straight line, we're going to be looking and we're going to go, that seam is gorgeous and this one's kind of okay.
She's judging later today, so these are things that she will be looking for.
Yes, these are things I'll be looking for. I won't be ugly to you, I promise. I'm a sweetie.
But she will judge you.
I will judge you.
In multiple ways.
Oh, yes. And also, finish your hems. I remember hearing about a Black Butler group that won Best in Show, but when you flipped their hems, they had gorgeous French seams. They did not have exposed fabrics. I'm trying to see if I can find a seam line here on my Rarity. So when you flip it up underneath, you'll notice that I've enclosed and I've finished my hem so that when somebody flips my dress up and over, you don't have the raw edge of the fabric out. And working in a fashion store, I've noticed that's a good difference between contemporary and couture. Contemporary has got the raw edge out there. They may serge it, and it's a good technique to have, but the couture will take time to do a French seam or a flat seam or something where the raw edges are encompassed and then put down. Attention to detail. If it needs more work, it's worth it. A girl did a corpse bride cosplay, and she had this gorgeous sheer fabric that had all this scrolling on it. And I went up there and I looked at it and I said, oh my God, that's piping fabric. And she had sat down for an almost solid year. She would take this to work, she would take it to school, and she would just sit there and hand sew this for a solid year to get the look that she wanted because she wanted that attention to detail. And something like that is something a judge is going to go, you went above and beyond. You did not go on eBay and buy the scrolled fabric. You did this by hand.
If you're entering a competition and you have done or you're planning to do these very detailed things, I know it's difficult for me to do this, so I mean it might be difficult for y'all to stop and actually take progress photos. I don't think about it. I'm like, I'm in the zone, and then when I'm done with it, I'm like, I don't want to see you for like a week. Go away. There have been, because cosplay, I think it's because cosplay is becoming more popular and more slightly more mainstream. A lot of people have come up to us during competitions as judges and told us, oh, well, I drafted this whole pattern by myself, and it was my first time, and I've never been to school. And I'm like, that is some BS right there. But I mean, and she didn't have any proof, and so she didn't win anything. And because none of the judges that were on that particular panel, we were all like, you don't sound like you know what you're talking about. We're not, I don't believe you. Now, it's completely possible that someone could come up to a judging panel and not really understand, not communicate very well what they did, and they may not be believed, and they could have done exactly what they said. But bring pictures, and a lot of the stricter competitions, I think, doesn't WCS require progress pictures?
I do believe, like my Holly Gloha cosplay, I love that because with my progress photos, if I don't have my folder with me, I can copy my photos and say, this is the shell of the costume, these are the inside seams finished, this is the steel boning that I've done, this is the birdcage skirt that I've made. It's always good to have the folder too, because judges can flip through that and start asking you questions. You know, I noticed you made this birdcage skirt. What did you use? Well, I used this fencing wire that I found at Home Depot. It's a 16 gauge, and then I wrapped felt around it so it doesn't snag on my fabric. And it just kind of gives you a conversation piece, lets the judges know that you know what you're talking about, because it may happen where somebody's like, well, I drafted my own pattern. Really, how'd you do that?
Or I did all this hand embroidery or this, beading or something, and it's like, I don't know, that looks awfully professionally manufactured to me. And also posting progress pictures on your Facebook or other social networking sites is an excellent motivational tool, because people will see it and like it and comment and go, wow, that looks awesome, I can't wait to see it, or hey, I thought you were working on that, when are you going to finish that? Because I don't know about y'all, but I can definitely lose motivation a lot of times with things.
Especially when it's not going your way. And honestly, even other people's progress photos will motivate me to work on mine. I'm like, okay, Jessie Pridemore's making this and she is doing just a great job. You know what, let me get back on my project. And things like piping, applique, embroidery, they make your costume stand out. And even some people are very gifted at painting, and they will do like an applique where they adhese the back with some like heat fabric, iron it onto their costume, and then just paint this beautiful design on top of this applique, and it just makes their costume stand out a little bit more. And that's it for the craftsmanship prize. If you want a best in show on a costume that you've sewn, you're going to need all this amazing craftsmanship and have fun with a fabulous on-stage performance. Most people will go on stage and pose 1, pose 2, pose 3, and then leave. And it's fabulous, you get some great photos, and I've had this happen where I went on stage dressed up as an anime version of Catwoman. I had this hideous prop whip, loved it, and I decided I'm gonna have as much fun on stage as I can, and I popped that whip as hard as I can. I was doing the Michelle Pfeiffer ear cleaning thing, and I was kind of doing the little dance. When I left, the judges were like, that was the reason why you were best in show. You got up in there, your costume was well made, and you were that character. And stuff like that resonates out into the audience. The audience loves it, the judges love it, and you'll love your trophy.
So many people, like at MechaCon, I was in it, so I didn't get to watch the competition, but I was told by so many people, well, you were like the only person that walked off stage in character still. And so most people will walk down the runway and maybe they'll be in character and they're good and they hit their marks and their poses, and then they turn around and walk away and they're just like, okay, I'm done now. And it's not. I mean, every single second you're on the stage is a performance, and people are looking at you the entire time. Well, that sounds kind of intimidating, I guess.
No, yeah.
But I mean,
they're enjoying your presentation.
It's all
Give
about.
them a fabulous show until that spotlight is just not on you anymore, and then you can relax and say, you know what, I left it all on the stage, and it was fun. And with that being said, I want to thank you for coming in. I hope it wasn't information overload and incredibly boring. Does anybody have any questions? I know I kind of saturated it.
I actually have two. How important is like a surgeon? I've heard that you can like do different stitches to get the same effect.
It's not necessary at all.
I was about to say, I'm learning the serger right now, and it seems to be good for like hem work. I've seen some good draping with the serger. I'm not familiar with it yet.
It depends on what you're doing.
Yeah.
You can French seam almost anything. It's harder on curves, but you can French seam and make things beautifully. Serging is more of a lower end. It's not couture. Couture work will not be serged. It will be French hemmed or other.
Even if they serge it, they'll serge it, but then they'll encase it within the hem. So if it's a delicate fabric,
to make it extra sturdy. But you do not have to have a serger whatsoever. Is it faster? Yes. Is it easier? Yes. If no one's going to be looking at those seams, go for it. It's going to save you time, frustration. But if you want that couture look, it is not necessary, and it's actually discouraged.
How important is getting a dress form if you plan on doing like clothing?
I don't know about important, but it's very convenient.
It's convenient. It also depends on the method of making your custom clothing, because leads me to my book.
Well, there's times when I'll adjust my dress form to what I think my measurements are, and you still have to measure it. And sometimes the torso length isn't exactly correct, but you can kind of see how it's starting to come together. And for me, I love my dress form. I would recommend it, but if you don't have one, don't shed a lot of tears yet.
It's very convenient and a lot faster to make your own patterns draping on a dress form. But you can also flat pattern draft, which is what this entire book is about, and this is like 600 pages. This is very convenient. It's very step-by-step for each. You want to make this kind of sleeve, okay, this is how you do it. You want to make this kind of bodice, this is how you do it. It just depends on what you prefer. Like, I was terribly interested in pattern making when I went to school. That was one of the things I was really excited to learn. So that I never draped. But now that I'm, like, my Nightmare Moon pattern that I just made, I draped it on a dress form that I just bought because I was like, this is going to be so much faster.
And I think Austin School of Design on Congress does specialty classes where they'll teach you how to drape, how to draft your own patterns, things like that, and you can pay for that specific class. And they may even be classes out there for sergers, which I would like to see them because I have a Husqvarna serger. I've only used it like 2 or 3 times.
I think Joanne may offer like intro to sergers.
Yeah.
Or if not, the one up north has a Viking center, but the company, the sewing machine company Viking Center within the store, which is not actually owned by, it's a separate store completely. They have their own register and everything, and they have their own classes with their embroidery machines and their sergers.
Alright. Is there any other questions?
Yesterday, y'all were talking about how you didn't need to create like jeans or a t-shirt. You can just go out and buy that stuff. Mm-hmm. When it comes to competition cosplay, like how does that run on the line with being closet cosplay because you bought that versus trying to compete and you didn't make it and things like, you know, where does that get fuzzy?
There's always a percentage that has to be handmade. Certain administrations will allow you to say, well, I dyed this, or I appliqued it, or I modified it, and depending on how you modified it, that may be enough to qualify it as handmade. But I mean, chances are, if it is a costume that has jeans as part of it, you're probably not going to win anything anyway.
I was about to say,
it's probably not a big enough. There's going to be things that are bigger, flashier, and handmade.
Yeah, it's like cosplaying as Elle from Death Note versus Princess Garnet from Final Fantasy, and they're going to go, well, denim jeans, gorgeous white ball gown with embroidery on it. And you can even check out like the costumes from World Cosplay Summit and other competitions. I can't think of one that a character had blue jeans and people were like, oh my god.
I mean, the closet cosplay is really more for
walk
the fun
on
of it.
and fun.
Yeah.
Or even just walking around and getting the attention.
I'm going to piggyback off what she said.
Sure.
For, let's say, like for today, there's a lot of people who are closet cosplaying and a lot of really nice costumes. What if you go to like a con? Like, I'm going to use Firefly.
Yeah.
If you go to a Firefly con and they wear normal clothes, would that competition be okay if you closet cosplay?
Oh yeah, it's closet cosplay just exempts you from craftsmanship. Craftsmanship is a different prize in and of itself. If it's a closet cosplay, you're eligible for Judges Award, Audience Favorites, Walk-On Favorites. You are eligible for so many prizes, just not craftsmanship. And taking Firefly, for example, there may be people that'll buy, you're talking like Joss Whedon's Firefly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there may be people that'll just buy the blue sun shirt and the little bobble hat.
Yeah.
But there may be somebody that, actually makes themselves a full-blown brown coat Civil War battle suit. Captain Mal's battle suit as he's fighting during the Battle of Serenity. And they'll look at the guy that bought his and say, he's having fun on stage. He's acting like Jane with his Varagun. That's an audience favorite there. That guy that made the brown coat, that made the pants and the boots and everything, he's eligible for craftsmanship because he kind of invested a little bit more into it.
And if you do decide to go crazy and actually make jeans or screen print your own t-shirt or whatever, if you have proof of that, because a lot of times people will be like, no, you just bought that. But if you do take those extra steps, that's still impressive.
Yes, it is.
Like, jeans are not easy to make. Jeans are not fun to make, they are not easy, and they take a long time. So if I had a contestant come up to a competition that I was judging and said, okay, I'm dressed as Elle, but I hand stitched everything and I, spun the cotton and made everything from scratch. There are cosplayers are facing up I would be like, you actually might have a chance at Best in Show.
And as judges, we would mention that.
Yes.
We would mention that on stage because if Elle walks up there and everybody's like, it's a sweatshirt and denim, it would be like, no, this gentleman, went to Spoonflower and had a specialty dyed denim, and then he stitched it himself with like this special top stitch, and then he spun the wool for this sweatshirt. We will explain why, although this looks like a simple cosplay, why it won its Best in Show. It's just usually for something like L, I keep using L as an example because that's just a sweatshirt and jeans. Most people are going to closet cosplay that and have fun with the character.
Also with like casual Avengers, like a lot of people walk around as Tony Stark with the glowing arc reactor under a t-shirt. That's great, and they may look great, they may act just like him, but unless they like made the arc reactor and made the pants or something, it's
and competition-wise, there's so much more than just best in show. The judges give awards for their personal favorites. Sometimes there's audience favorites, whoever the audience cheers the most for, or whoever has the most impressive walk-on. And then you move on to like craftsmanship and best in show, but those are 2 out of copious amounts of awards that you can win.
And other competitions, one of the awards that's kind of growing in popularity is like best prop.
Yeah.
But there are so many awards that most competitions give now.
Yeah. Oh.
What are some resources you can give if you know any for heavy duty and use street performance cosplay? Like you know that you're going to wear something that's going to need a lot of durability because you're just constantly performing it.
You mean somewhere to buy those costumes
No,
or the fabric?
There's resources to figure out how to reinforce costumes in a way that's meant for constant use, almost like a circus performance in terms of use.
Oh, like it's like high impact wear and like it's just, all amount of clothing get wear. And you can even go to a store like where I work at the fashion store, and everything gets a certain amount of wear. It really just depends on the fabrics that you use. My Amikomi Catwoman is made out of a metallic spandex. And there's wear because even as I wear it, some of the metallic is starting to flake off.
You can always reinforce fabric with interlinings, like maybe a canvas interlining to make it, it'll make it stiffer, but it'll also make it a lot more durable.
And you might want to use like stronger fabrics instead of using maybe a satin. You might want to go for something like cotton where it's...
You can use also like outdoor fabrics and upholstery fabrics. A lot of Ren Fair goers will use the upholstery fabrics, not only because it looks appropriate, but because they drag their stuff through the mud. They're out in the elements. They're out camping. It gets packed and thrown, and it's made to be a little more durable.
Do we have any more questions?
Comments, concerns?
I hope you guys had a blast. I'm sorry I ran over a little bit, but I really hope you learned something new. You're not going to be so scared